Hello everyone, this is Reza. Welcome to another Nuke video. In this video we'll learn how to set up merged AOVs inside Maya, and we'll learn how to catch shadow using Arnold shaders. We then take our single merged pass into Nuke and we use a variety of techniques to extract layers out of that pass in a most efficient, industry-friendly workflow. I squeezed a lot of tips and tricks in this video, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. So let's get to it. Now here I am inside Maya. We've already looked at this scene in the previous video when we talked about separate AOVs. It's pretty much the same process. I gave the ground AI matte shader and I use Arnold lights for my scene, 2 directional lights and 1 sky dome light in Arnold, and then I assigned an HDR image into the color channel of my dome light. Now with that done, it's time to open render settings. Make sure your Arnold render or any preferred render that you have is selected. And in my case, because I'm using Arnold, I have AOVs tab, and I've already gone ahead and picked all the preferred passes. Now this bit is very similar to the previous video when I talked about multipass rendering and compositing using single AOVs. So you can definitely watch that video and see how I went about that. The only difference in here is I can right click of any of these guys and go select driver and go to attribute editor, Control A, and make sure merged AOVs is selected. Now another way to find that is, I believe, in Common tab and merged AOVs. The rest, you specify your image size, renderable camera, and frame range, extension, which in my case is EXR. You specify your samplings here and your ray depth, and then with that you're ready to go. Now I'm going to go to rendering and render, and through render sequence I render out my AOV. So basically for each frame you get one file, one EXR, and all the passes are embedded inside that one frame. I'm going to just render a single frame, and as a result of that I'm going to get a single AOV. Now let's render this out as merged AOV as a single pass and see how we can composite those passes together inside Nuke. Here I am inside Nuke. I've rendered my single EXR pass successfully. Now if you're wondering where to find the extra layers, because we no longer deal with individual passes, they're all inside the layer. So we can look at direct diffuse, diffuse indirect, emission, shadow matte, and some of these passes are a bit too subtle. So if you, for example, don't see a specific pass, you can always increase gamma or gain to see them individually. For now, I'm going to switch back to RGBA and see how we can extract those layers as well. And you can see we've got that green chip here saying that it's high dynamic range image, RGBA, everything is ready to go. I've brought in my backplate as well. This is the exact same backplate I used in the previous video, just to show you that you can get the exact same result using a slightly different method. Now I'm going to work with shuffle all the way through, and I'm using again backdrops just to stay organized. So I'm going to create a backdrop. Principles stay the same. We are using the good old being organized sort of method. I'm going to move the main pass up. We are not going to place it here, so I'm going to move this up. I'm going to bring this background to the side, and let's just create a backdrop for the background as well. Here, BG for backdrop. I'm going to reduce the number of my property bins to something like 2. So I'm not going to get too many property bin windows open. And probably I need to change the size of these guys as well. That's better. Now, as I said, I'm going to use shuffle node all the way through. So I will be using the new shuffle node available in Nuke 12 version 3. So if I double click on it, the interface is slightly different, but to be honest with you, it does exactly the same. But the new interface is more straightforward. So I'm quite happy with this facelift that Foundry did on this node here. So let's have a look and see how we can fix that. First things first, I'm going to go to node and make sure my postage stamp is on, so I kind of would like to see what I'm dealing with. And then from here you go and pick your channel. As usual, we go with diffuse first, and then we go to specular, alpha, so on and so forth. So let's start with diffuse direct. I'm going to connect that to my merged AOVs, and if I have a look at it, you can see I have my diffuse direct. Now I'm simply going to press Ctrl C, Ctrl V, bring this guy to the position, plug in pipe B to my merged AOV, and just change the name of shuffle to, add a label basically to it, and say diffuse indirect. Now we have this label correctly named. I just need to make sure that I pick diffuse indirect. And you can see I actually do have diffuse indirect. It's just a little bit subtle. Bring this back to the position. Now, exactly the way we merged these two together in the previous video, we are going to do the same. So I'm going to select diffuse direct, press M, it connects it to pipe A. And B goes to diffuse indirect, Control to create a dot. I'm going to select the merge node, change that to plus, and done. If I look at it, we have our diffuse passes successfully combined. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm actually going to continue with the same fashion. So plugging this time, let's say specular direct. And I'm going to name that specular direct. I'm going to copy and paste and make this one specular indirect. That's great. Let's update the node as well. So specular indirect, and this one is specular direct. Using the exact same method, specular direct, M plugs it to pipe A, B goes to indirect, Control to create a dot node, and we have our specular passes combined. Now all I need to do just to select this guy and change the operation to plus. Now time to use these two categories, diffuse and specular, and merge them together as well. I'm going to select merge to, press M, bring it over, B goes in here, and of course I'm going to change the operation to plus, Control, create a dot node, and I successfully combined diffuse and specular, just like that. So it's very, very, very straightforward, very easy to work with, and that's the main difference between individual passes and merged AOVs. And I find merged AOVs actually much faster to composite. But let's continue. What else do we have? We have subsurface scattering. So let's bring it in. I'm going to extend this backdrop and let's create another shuffle node. Bring it over here. Plug that to my merged AOVs. I'm going to pick subsurface scattering, go to node, enable postage stamp, and just label it. Now we have subsurface scattering, and all I need to do is to again bring it over and combine it. So subsurface scattering, pressing M, we bring it over, plug B goes to the main stream, dot node and merge needs to be plus. So if I look closely and update my viewer to merge 4, now we can see, if I zoom on the teeth, we can see that now we have subsurface scattering on the teeth. Now let's bring alpha. So I need to create another shuffle node, postage stamp on, we call this alpha. We move this and plug that into here. And for alpha, if you remember, we used copy node. Nothing has changed. Let's use copy node. The shortcut for it was the letter K. So I'm going to select the shuffle node and press K. That pipes the A into shuffle node. And of course, B goes to the main node tree. I'm going to create my dot node. And as usual, usually red goes to alpha, but if I look very closely, I do have alpha here. So this default setup will work. All I need to do in my shuffle node, I need to make a few changes. I need to make sure that alpha in here goes to alpha in a destination. So if I view this, the beauty of it is if I press A, I get my alpha. That's exactly what I want. So let's continue. I'm just gonna press A again to toggle to RGB. Now we have all the primary passes ready to go. Let's go ahead and set up our auxiliary passes. So we want to keep the same structure that we had in the previous video and have our light pass and our ID pass and depth pass in. Now we have all the right backdrops ready to go. Let's create a shuffle node in here. I'm going to again enable postage stamp and copy and paste them into each block. Makes everything much easier because just we use the same method and the same node type to extract the layers. Now I'm going to plug them all into my merged AOVs. Now everything is plugged. Let's go and see what we can do for each individual pass. Now you can see that if you remember, I had transmission and I also had emission attribute was another attribute that I had. So I need to have 2 shuffle nodes for my light inside auxiliary passes. And don't worry about all the clutter that you see. We are going to clean them up towards the end of this tutorial. So let's focus on transmission for now. So I'm just going to label that as transmission. And inside this shuffle 7, I'm going to go ahead and find transmission in here. If you remember, for that transmission, I had to drop in a grade node, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Because if I look at my transmission, it's not really pronounced the effect. So I'm going to do the same trick to highlight my transmission. I'm going to go to grade node and multiply the values to something like 3 and add a little bit of gain. 2.5 should do it. I try to stay with the same values that I used for the previous video, and that really should do it. You can of course decrease gamma a little bit or increase them, so you know, just whatever goes for your taste, you can do it. Also for the other shuffle node, which is responsible, type this emission first things first, and then I will extract emission out of that. So if I look at it, I should be able to see the emission value correctly. That is great. Now I need 2 glow nodes because eventually I need them to glow. I need 1 glow, call this one tight, and with the tight glow I just need a very low value of size, so probably 6. As you can see, it's very close to the edges. I'm going to probably color it just a tad, like so. Orange color will do. Brightness set to 0.9, and then copy and paste that, the secondary glow node, and that secondary glow node is going to be a kind of widespread type of glow, and I'm going to change the size from 6 to something like 30 and increase the redness, increase the brightness, and that should do it. So these 2 passes are ready. Let's see how we can connect them into our main node tree. Now, before I connect them to the main node tree, I need to connect them together using a simple merge node. So A goes to transmission, B goes to glow. I'm going to create a dot node. Obviously, this one is set to plus, and if I connect them together, I have both transmission and emission value with the right amount of glow. And if you think this is too much, once we combine everything together, it's not going to be that strong, this effect, glow effect right here. Now it's time to use another merge node and just bring that merge node into the main node tree. So I'm just going to bring it over here, plug it in, combine it all together, and now we have glow on transmission on top of everything else. You can see we have glow. I can press D, go before and after, and that works beautifully for us. Yep, that's done. Let's move on to ambient occlusion. So if I go here and find ambient occlusion and view it, you can see we have ambient occlusion. There's not much to it really. Selecting ambient occlusion, I'm going to press M, bring it down. B goes to the main node tree, holding down Control, create another dot node so it's easier to read. Now, what I said about ambient occlusion in the previous video, and I'm going to repeat pretty much the same thing, is if I view that, obviously this is going to be plus and this is going to be multiply. So you always use multiply for ambient occlusion. Now, if you take a good look before and after, we lose a lot of information. One way is to play around with mix, which is not preferred. We tend not to touch that. Good idea is just to throw in a color correct. So pressing C on your keyboard to create a color correct node, and then just change the gamma. So I'm going to put something like 4 or 3.5 for gamma. It dials AO back to whatever value the brief says, so you can kind of fine tune it that way. Now AO is done. Let's have a look at depth. For depth, we go and pick depth, and that goes into RGBA alpha. Now, what we can do here is to create a copy node. We just press K, create a copy node. We bring this down. B goes to the main node tree, holding down Control, creating another dot node. So everything nice and clean. Double click. Now in this copy node, we want to make sure that Z depth goes into depth. So depth Z goes into depth Z, and we've already specified the right channel. I'm going to label it. Well, turns out I connected to the ID, so I'm just going to fix that. Apologies. So that is correct. I'm going to label this one correctly. Obviously ID is ID. As a matter of fact, we have a custom ID file, so I don't really need to use that. I can delete that. I'm going to replace it with my own ID here. Now, I'm looking at this Z depth, and I've got the information I need, so I can later on just throw in a ZD focus and fix my depth of field if need be. Now, the approach for IDs or ID maps is using again shuffle node. So create one shuffle node for red channel, create another shuffle node for green channel, and create another shuffle node, yes, you guessed it, for blue channel. Now I need to plug them to my custom ID. Now I'm going to select red shuffle node, and I need to make sure that everything is disconnected. Red goes to RGB alpha. For green, green goes to RGB alpha. For blue is the same thing. Now to plug them all, I need a grade node. So I'm going to go back in here, just pressing G, and the mask channel can go into one of these guys. So probably in here, I can just drop in a dot node. One can go into the green channel, and the other one can get information from the mask channel from my grade node. Now I'm going to just label that grade ID. Now we don't need really to change this mask. We can just leave it as it is. We can just and see what channel we want to tweak. So we want to tweak green, we want to tweak red, or we want to tweak blue. If I look at my green, I want to multiply the values on the green channels on my render. So all I need to do is to make sure that G is connected to my mask. And when I look at my mask and change the multiplication, so let's say I'm going to put 1.9, only the green portion of my ID is going to get affected. So before, after. Now you can tint that, you can change lift, gain, offset, or gamma. You can even inverse the scenario, so everything else will get affected but that color. So very, very efficient and quite powerful. Now lucky last, I'm just going to zoom out. So final pass is actually the shadow pass. So you can actually go here and have a look at your shadow mat. Now what I have as my shadow mat, I'm just going to label it. Now what I have as my shadow mat, all the information I need is in white, and I need to invert it. So I'm going to press tab, invert, and invert the information. It comes with the character and the shadow, so I need to pre-molt it. So type in pre-molt, and it creates a holdout for me, and that's exactly what I need. And now with this in place, all I need to do is just to plug this into my background here. So before I plug everything, let's have a look at my background. My background is 6000 by 4000, whereas my actual pass is 6064. So I need to reformat this guy. Reformat, so it's got the same size as my auxiliary and primary passes. If I double click on this reformat, I should be able to find this resolution here. And just a side note, another easier way of doing this so reformat gets the default correct resolution is to press S, bring project settings, and just plug that project setting to that resolution. With that, if you create constant, if you create checkerboard, if you create whatever default Nuke node, that will be brought with the right size format. So, but again, you can always go ahead and change that here as well. Now with this right resolution in place, let's throw in a merge node. B goes to the background and A goes to the shadow. So I'm just going to bring it over here. Now we're not going to touch the primary and auxiliary passes yet. We just want to plug that one into our shadow. I need to grab this dot node here, move it back to the position. Now I'm going to zoom in, select on the over, and switch that to multiply. Now if I have a look at it, I should be able to have my shadow with the right direction. The only problem is this robot is way too small. Another excuse to take it to the next level and use all the valuable tools inside Nuke to fix the situation. Now, obviously, I need to scale this up and reposition it. Anything to do with scaling, positioning, translating is transform. So with nothing selected, actually, I'm going to press T, drop it in here, and I'm going to put scale 1.2, and that should actually drop this guy into the right place. So there is another case where you want to put another color correct node and change the gamma in case if you want to. So very similar to ambient occlusion, I can actually throw in a color correct node and change the gamma to change the intensity of my shadow. So just try to match the richness of the shadow and get as close as possible. You can even throw in another blur node and blur out the edges. Mine is okay, so I'm not going to be too picky about it. I'm just going to eyeball it. It looks okay to me. Now what I did, I'm not sure if you've noticed, I changed the position of my shadows, but my color passes are still small in a different location. So they're not going to line up if I merge these two together. So I need to use the exact same node on my color passes as well. Now, before I do that, I probably need to go back to this grade node and make tiny changes to bits and pieces. So what I want to do, I just want to throw in a grade node here because I know for a fact that the coloration is slightly off when you merge it to our background. I would like to reduce the gain, and of course this is a completely optional scenario that I'm doing here, increasing the gamma in my case only. But if you feel that the brightness, the black point and the white points are not matching up, then by all means go ahead and throw in a grade node and try to get it as close as possible. So I'm just going to change a few values here, probably add a little bit of red, and that should really do it for me. So I'm just going to label this CC for color correct. That's ironic because I put in color correct on a grade node. Never mind, moving forward, I throw in ZD focus. Now, if you would like to make use of your depth pass, that would be the right time to do it. I'm going to probably bring this dot node and the transform node and the merge node lower a little bit. Now, if I double click on it, probably I'm not going to see much, simply because everything I have is on the right plane. This error is not really a critical error. It's trying to do all the calculation and computational process from my Tesla C2075 graphic card. I'm going to say use CPU instead, and that should fix it. Again, I'm not going to use ZD focus, but in case if you want to use it, you need to set math to depth, bring in the focal point somewhere that you want to be in focus, and then you can switch the output to focal plane and just play around with depth of field. Now this green area will be in focus. You can increase the size and intensify the blurriness outside the focused area. So red and blue will be out of focus, green will be in focus, and it's just a trial and error. You just go back and forth and see if you like the result. So, but again, for my case, everything is sort of on the same plane, so I'm not going to see much of a difference. There's no depth of field here, unless if I have something in the far background or near ground, then I can kind of have depth in my 3D scene. I'm going to disable it for now. Now, I would like to clone this transform and have it on my color passes as well. Alt K is going to clone this guy. Now with these two connected, I'm going to plug it to my color passes. So my color passes will get exactly the same position as my shadow pass. That was a very critical step, and obviously you guys don't want to miss that. Now, in case if you enable Z depth or any other processing intensive node, maybe blur node, you may get some out of the bounding box region that may get calculated. So it's always a wise move to just throw in a crop node, make sure that outside this bounding box nothing is processed. And we're going to do one of these guys again right at the end. Now, time to merge background and foreground. So color pass will be our foreground, and of course background will remain as background. I'm going to press M for foreground, and then B goes to my background, and let's view this. You can see immediately I'm getting another border, shows that this area is getting calculated, but the good news is it's lining up perfectly and everything looks great. Now, after this point, really, there is no have to do step. Of course, there's one you need to do it step, and that is to put a crop node, as I mentioned. So I'm just going to throw in a crop node. That's going to crop the unnecessary area outside the scene, and it's not going to get calculated, because if you don't do it, although we don't see it, it still gets calculated. So having that crop node is absolutely essential. I'm going to throw in a grade node in here and playing around with the coloration, adding a slight touch of a red into my scene, like so. So if you look closely, before, after, just to blend those together, I'm going to label it as blend as well. And then final touch, as my very last node, again because it's an expensive node, I'm going to put in a grade node preset to a GT codec, and it just adds noise to the foreground as well, because foreground was pretty clean, background is noisy, so it helps that to blend. So you can see before, after, it helps that foreground background to blend. And then throw in a write node and write out your sequence if you want to. This is it. That was how to do it using merged AOVs. You can see we really followed the exact same process. The principles stay the same. All we did, we used a shuffle node to extract those layers, but the rest is pretty much similar to how we went about it in the previous video. Now, you may again say, well, I really dislike these lines that I'm getting. You can always go to each shuffle node and just hide the input. How cool is that? So this helps you with organization, and it shows up only if you select that shuffle mode. That's it. This is the end of this tutorial. Again, special thanks to Tim Parsons for contributing to this tutorial. Hope you use it in your own projects. Have a great day. Until the next video.